Well, Hamlet is a revenge tragedy. In fact, Hamlet is expected to revenge his father's death. And in the Renaissance period, the aristocratic code of justice and honor demands revenge. And even the killing of a king for Shakespeare is the beginning of the corruption of society. Some of the attributes that the Renaissance gives to the nature of man are well depicted in Shakespeare's work Hamlet. For example, the relationship between father and son, or at least the ghost of his father that appears in his dreams asking for revenge, the relationship between Hamlet and his mother, or the relationship between Hamlet and his friends that have a variation in the evolution of the play. The love relationship in this play is also important. The role of madness when Hamlet pretends to be mad and putting in the play, trying to make it possible for him to understand from the reaction of his uncle Claudius and his mother in what way they are in the killing of his father. The contrast between youth and age, the energy of youth and the corrupted age, the contrast between action and inaction, whether it's better to act or just to remain there watching things go on, the role of power as a corruptive element, and naturally the existence of God and a life after death, as Shakespeare puts it, the undiscovered country from whose bourne no traveller returns. Naturally, he often reflects on this, the extraordinary abilities of the human mind when he says, "What a piece of work is man." And he speculates mostly on the meaning of life and death. Naturally, all of you have heard thousands of times the famous soliloquy, "To be or not to be, that is the question. Whether 'tis noble in the mind to suffer the slings and the arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against the tree of troubles, and by opposing end them." I mean, you see this fundamental contrast between if it is possible to act or just remain there, consider things, try to understand, and then to see what happens afterwards. Other important question is the relationship between appearance and the reality. For him, it's difficult to separate the irreality, the ghost in some way, or the reality of imagination, or how things should be conceived and what happens in reality. The role of women, there are only two in this work. His mother, Queen Gertrude, and that for him has had too much haste in marrying his uncle Claudius, which who his father in some way says that is the author of his killing, and Ophelia, that he thinks is part of the plot against him. Well, as we know, there is much psychological penetration in this work, and mostly it reflects on the relationship with the outside world. And naturally, what comes from the beginning of this to be or not to be is the theme of doubt and uncertainty. And his action, in some way, tends to destroy the sources of corruption that are within the state. This is an overview, naturally quite brief, of this very important work, but there are so many things that we should gather on. Naturally, we could at this point, Shakespeare's sonnets have a universal theme. They speak about love, beauty, art, time, death. Love, in particular, uh, must concern in some way the theme explored from a variety of different perspectives. As a referring point, we will take uh, maybe one of the most famous sonnets in uh, his collection, that is made of 154 sonnets. We know, for example, from the first to the number 126, they are addressed to this fair youth that probably is the young patron of Shakespeare, that is the Earl of Southampton. While the remaining ones, up to 154, it is addressed to this phantomatic dark lady that in some way is physically unattractive but desirable in some way. Now, Shakespeare explores the nuances of love and the suffering that it brings, totally different from the pure love idealized, for example, by Petrarch in Italy. The theme of love is strictly related to the theme of beauty and immortality. The poet underlines the brevity of man's life and the ineluctability of death. There are only two solutions, in his opinion, to face the problem. One is marrying and having children, so you have something that goes on of your life. The other is poetry. Uh, the verses will always, according to him, remain alive and will eternalize in some way the beauty of the love. So in his sonnets, there is a reversal of the traditional love poems praising woman's worth and beauty, as they are addressed to a young man, while those devoted to a woman are in some way negative and non-conventional. So we can say that in the Elizabethan age, there are two kinds of sonnets, the Italian one, or the Petrarchan one, and the English one, or Shakespearean one. Both of them have 14 lines, but there is a different division of the lines and the stanzas. For example, in the Italian one, we have two stanzas, one octave and one sestet, while in the English one, we have four stanzas made of three quatrains and one couplet. In general, the three quatrains that Shakespeare uses contain a series of reflections on different problematics, while the final couplet introduces the turning point and puts an end to the reflection that have been faced in the other stanzas. The sonnet 14, that is, Shall I Compare Thee to a Summer's Day, has naturally is one of the 14-line poems written in what we generally call iambic pentameter. In other words, a pentameter is made of 5 meters or decasyllables. Okay. And it is important to understand the rhythm because the stress that we generally put on a syllable gives the rhythm to the sonnet. And it is important to use this to give life to the sonnet. For example, iambic means only that when there is a pentameter, in a meter, there are 2 syllables, and the stress falls on the second syllable, not on the first. So if we read this few lines of this sonnet, we can read it in this way: Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. Rough winds do shake the dulling buds of May, and summer's leaves have all too short a date. So if we give this certain rhythm, naturally it becomes surely more agreeable to the ear as Shakespeare wanted it. Naturally, the themes of the awareness of the transience of beauty is fundamental, and the relationship between human and the natural beauty and the power of poetry that defeats death in some way is what we said before, how we can eternalize the beauty of the person we have put in poetry. The first two stanzas of this particular sonnet 14 in some way points out that everything beautiful in nature sooner or later declines with the passing of the seasons. Okay. In the third stanza, when it says, "But thy eternal summer shall not fade," there's this "but" that changes something, introduces a new idea. In other words, his lover's youth and fairness will never decline, okay, as it happens in nature, nor forgotten in the shadow of death. So it wins death and will continue to live in eternity. And the final couplet, in some way, sticks out what is this eternal idea when he says, "So long as men can breathe or eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee." And that's in some way how it concludes this comparing the declining of nature and the eternity of poetry. Naturally, the other sonnets, for example, speaking about this dark lady, the better example would be the sonnet 130, when he speaks about his mistress, when he says, "My mistress's eyes are nothing like the sun. Coral is far more red than her lips red." So he changes completely. While on the first example we have seen nature in some way is inferior to youth, okay, that the comparison does not exist. In these sonnets, nature wins on the beautifulness of the human body. So in some way, we can say that it focuses on the true nature of love and beauty. It has a satirical tone regarding it is very satirical in the idealization of women and as it happened in the conventional love poems. So we can say that he describes his beloved as a real woman and not as an idealization as it happened in the conventional love poems.